And so those who suggest that, okay, to build the temple, you're going to have to raise hell and move the Dome of the Rock, and that's just never going to happen. Well, there is a case to be made. I'm not saying this is fact or indefinite. I'm just saying there is a case to be made that we could see a future generation where this is the Temple Mount. This is a man, he's a PhD scholar, and he's done some research. And he wrote a book called The Temple Revealed. I'll leave a link in the description as well as a link to this video, because we're not going to watch the whole thing, in the description, where he presents a pretty compelling case that he knows where the temple was built. We're going to see that in a minute. But also that it could be built on the Temple Mount without having to bother the Dome of the Rock. So we'll begin this video here. Let him introduce himself and tell you about his book, and then we'll skip ahead to where he starts talking about a few of the main identity markers on the Temple Mount.
It's all laid out in my book, The Temple Revealed, which I think proves beyond a reasonable doubt where the former Jewish temple sat on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Here are some examples of the many attempts in the past to determine the correct location of the temple, but they've always been less than fully convincing. I started looking into this question in 2008, and I can tell you that sorting through all of the endless historical and archaeological reports connected to the temple was like trying to untangle a knotted up fishing line. But I'm firmly convinced that the answer can now be known beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm an engineer, researcher, and an independent scholar who takes the Bible very seriously. I'm also a former tenured university professor, and so I'm familiar with a lot of the scientific-based questions that students have when they begin to question their faith. To help provide some answers for them, I got very interested in the scientific defense and analysis of the Bible. That's how I met my friend Josh McDowell, who encouraged me in this effort and kindly wrote the foreword for my book. But I'm not an archaeologist, nor am I previously published in the field. I'm a researcher who has conducted an independent review of the available evidence to see if there are some things that may have been overlooked. What I've done is to sort through historical reports and archaeological findings that demonstrate that there is some prima facie evidence that alone is sufficient to establish the proper location of the temple.
Okay, and so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. What he's about to do is kind of tell you why he's qualified to do this research. And so you can go look at all of that on your own if you would like. But let me skip ahead to where he starts telling us about the discoveries he's made.
In this video are from those trips. And now that you know something about me, let me tell you what I've learned. Finding hidden landmarks. The key to finding the temple location is actually quite simple. You have to identify reliable landmarks or remnants of the temple that was destroyed. Now that can be pretty difficult given that not one stone was left on another, and a lot has happened to this site over the past 2,000 years to obscure whatever was left. Plus, no archaeological investigations have even been allowed on the Temple Mount, so that makes it pretty tough to get to the bottom of things. But what if there were some remaining visible landmarks? Ones that could show us exactly where the temple used to sit. If it can be shown that there are some existing structures that point out the exact location of the former temple, which have been hiding in plain sight because of modern misidentification, wouldn't that be worth examining? So how was the temple location chosen in the first place? The answer is found in 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles 3:1. Then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was on the threshing floor of Aruna the Jebusite, the place provided by David. But what is a threshing floor? It was a wide, flat area where the chaff could be separated from the grain. A threshing sledge would be dragged around in circles by an ox or donkey. Now the best threshing floor surfaces were flat, solid rock, like the one seen here at a site in Israel called Deir Saman. Of course, threshing floors weren't always solid rock, and the scriptures are not explicit on that point either, but the traditional Jewish view is that it was bedrock, and they called it the foundation stone. And so, are there any flat threshing-type floor surfaces visible on the Temple Mount? Finding the threshing floor. Yes, there is a possible threshing floor surface on the Temple Mount, but only one, and it is found underneath the Dome of the Spirits. The Dome of the Spirits is a small stone cupola with a dark metal roof. It's found on the northwest corner of the platform near the Dome of the Rock. Built by Ottomans in the 16th century, it is also known as Kubat al-Arwa. Underneath the dome, there is a large, flat, and pockmarked stone surface. It's a part of the original bedrock of Mount Moriah. The most well-known case for recognizing that this is the site of the threshing floor of Aruna and the Holy of Holies of the temple was made by Dr. Asher Kaufman in 2004 in his book, The Temple Mount, Where is the Holy of Holies? I'm just picking up and strengthening his arguments with new findings. For example, take a close look at the surface of the floor. It is strikingly flat and would be an excellent candidate for a threshing floor. In fact, if one was so inclined, they could even thresh grain on it today. and it is quite similar to the surface of the threshing floor at Deir Saman. And the next question is, are there any other surfaces like this on the Temple Mount? Well, inside the Dome of the Rock, there is another piece of bedrock. It's called Al-Sakra. It is the only other known bedrock candidate for a threshing floor inside the 36-acre Temple Mount. And while it has plenty of evidence of being cut and modified in the past, based on the remaining areas of natural and irregular rock surfaces, I would argue that it has never been flat. And if it was never flat, then it was never a threshing floor. And if it was never a threshing floor, then it can't mark the location of the temple.
All right, so that's a pretty profound statement. And it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And now there's a second landmark, and I might have to fast forward to it. I'm not sure what he's about to go into. But in between the two landmarks, the threshing floor was the first, there's a second one. The temple was situated certain position between these two landmarks.
To which I would add one more piece of logic. If the threshing floor was how the temple was located in the first place, then of necessity any competing proposal for a temple location is substantially weakened if it can't identify a threshing floor candidate. Now some have argued that this 10-foot diameter area of bedrock isn't big enough to be a threshing floor, but that would be mistaken on two counts. So first,
now he goes on to argue and defend a little bit more about the threshing floor piece, so please by all means go back and watch the totality of this video, because there's some compelling evidence, but I want to get to the second landmark. So let me skip ahead, because there's a lot of really great info in here, but not for our purposes today. Let me start about here and see what we got.
Modified or repaired. It simply means that it's exactly where it's always been, despite any modifications or repairs that were necessary over the millennia. Furthermore, if one examines the weathering of the Golden Gate, an argument can also be made that the weathering of the stone is consistent with other carved stone monuments nearby, like Absalom's tomb.
So the Golden Gate is the second landmark. We skipped a bunch of the research behind that in the biblical text. And so you'll want to go back and maybe watch the video for yourself or get his book. Again, the link for both of those are in the description. But the second landmark is the Golden Gate, and that's what we're going to see now.
Which has been dated to the end of the Second Temple period. Both are Jerusalem stone and were exposed to the same weather conditions, and so, by comparison, the Golden Gate should be at least as old. Now this analysis is rudimentary, and it can't be used for precise dating, but it does support dating the Golden Gate into the Second Temple period. And it might actually help support the argument that these tombs in the Kidron Valley could be even older than most people think, if we connect the Golden Gate to the First Temple period. And here's another major observation that supports these conclusions. The bedrock underneath the dome is directly in line with the Golden Gate. Standing on the Temple Mount, looking east through the Dome of the Spirits, it's clear that you are in a direct line with the Golden Gate, which is also easily seen looking from an aerial view.
All right, and this is important, right? So here we have the Golden Gate. You cannot see my mouse on the screen. So down at the bottom of your screen, near the scrub bar for the YouTube video, you see the Golden Gate, and then directly straight up, you have the threshing floor. All right, and the temple was situated right in between those, biblically speaking, and that's the case he presents throughout the 25-minute video. But also, this Golden Gate is the eastern gate. It's the gate that Ezekiel 40 through 43, says that the Messiah will enter, that Jesus, when he steps his foot on the Mount of Olives, will enter into that, and he rode his donkey into that before he was crucified. So this valley, though, that you see even further down from the Golden Gate, just beyond that valley is the Mount of Olives, all right? And so you would come down from the Mount of Olives, through that valley, up through the whitewashed tombs. I believe that's where the whitewashed tombs are. I might be wrong about that. But into that Golden Gate, and then straight ahead, you have the threshing floor. And that's his point here.
Now the probability that these two things could be aligned by accident is 1 in 1426, or a 0.07% chance. The other way to look at that is it's a 99.93% chance that the alignment is no coincidence. That means that there's a 99.93% chance that the bedrock underneath the Dome of the Spirits really is the threshing floor of Aruna, and that it marks the location of the Holy of Holies of the temple. And And here's a diagram of what the temple layout could look like.
All right, so this is pretty cool. Here's what I was saying, that you might not have to move or mess with even the Dome of the Rock. Like, you could build this temple without even hindering the Muslim worship, if this is right and this is plausible here. So you can see where the temple is outlined through dotted lines just to the right of the temple. And it has to be situated right in between the threshing floor and the Golden Gate. The Golden Gate goes right to the Holy of Holies, and then the threshing floor is right there in a straight line.
With the temple inside of a 500 cubit square, notice that the Golden Gate in its current position is about 250 cubits from the northern boundary. So based on the abbreviated evidence presented here, I hope you see that a very compelling case can be made for the northern placement of the temple. The strength of the case rests on identifying two reliable landmarks. Together, they present true prima facie evidence. This means that establishing these two landmarks alone is sufficient to prove that this is indeed the former location of the Jewish temple. And while this doesn't address every possible question and mystery of the Temple Mount, its structures, and how the temple services were performed, etc., it answers the single most important question: where was it located?
And there you have it. I think that's a cool little image. So that's what figuratively that placing the temple on the northern side might look like. You can see where the Golden Gate lines up straight to that door on the front of the temple, and then it goes straight in line to the threshing floor, all right, towards the back side of the temple. And so those who suggest that, okay, to build the temple, you're going to have to raise hell and move the Dome of the Rock, and that's just never going to happen. Well, there is a case to be made. I'm not saying this is fact or indefinite. I'm just saying there is a case to be made that we could see a future generation where this is the Temple Mount, which is an interesting thought. And it does seem to make sense where the man of lawlessness could play off of this, is what I was trying to say earlier, but not get too carried away with imagination, where the man of lawlessness could play off of this. Okay, and so I think it's pretty cool. I'd love to know what you think. Let me know in the comments below or in the chat if you are watching with me. Let's dive